Before this video gets started, I want to quickly mention that if you want to support the channel more directly, you can now become a channel member. If you're interested, you can click the join button below, where you'll be able to take a look at the benefits of becoming a member, and also see the badges and emojis you will receive.
Oh yes, I'm rumbly in my tumbly.
Here we go, the Royal Rumble. Jesus Christ, 60,000, we can barely beat them. 80,000. Alright, if we lose to fucking half our size in Ottomans, we're losing. Jesus Christ. We lost! They had an army half of our size and we lost?
In this video, I will be taking a quick look at 6 different countries that exist today when they were at their greatest extent, as well as showing a somewhat realistic greater version of these countries that could have been. If you haven't watched my first 3 videos in this series, you can click the links in the description to check them out. In the first video, I also provide a more thorough explanation of irredentism and the topic as a whole. But with that said, let's get started. First, we'll cover China. China, at its greatest extent, if we include tributary states, is arguably the Tang Dynasty at around 663 AD. China at this time controlled all of what we would see as the Han Chinese core: southern China, Manchuria, Mongolia, northern Vietnam, Tibet, and much of Central Asia. This dynasty even reached as far as to border the Persians, but China controlling this much land today is, in my opinion, not very feasible. So I would argue a more realistic Greater China today is one which controls what the Qing dynasty did before the Chinese Revolution. This could happen in 2 ways. One way is if the Qing dynasty somehow manages to reform into a modern nation, perhaps allowing a lot more freedoms and economic movement, and another way this could happen is if the following Republic of China somehow managed to win the Civil War decisively. Regardless of how this Greater China came to be, it would make China a significantly larger and more powerful nation. If it managed to stay together, it could already have rivaled the US in the late 80s or early 90s, just as the USSR began to fall. As we all probably know, Mongolia at its height was the largest contiguous empire in history. It dominated the Eurasian continent, controlling territories as far west as Ukraine and as far east as Korea. But a more realistic Greater Mongolia today, in my opinion, is not quite so ambitious in its scope. It would be in a scenario where perhaps the Chinese Civil War raged on for much longer and left the nation completely in shambles, with no unifying force powerful enough to keep it all together. This could potentially allow Mongolia to regain the territory of Inner Mongolia, which is a part of China today that has a large Mongolian population. This Greater Mongolia would have almost 10 times the population as Mongolia does in our timeline, and be a much more significant force in the region. But despite its much larger population, it would likely still end up falling under Russian or Chinese influence today, depending on the situation in China in this hypothetical scenario. Italy is a country with a very rich history of empires, division, and later unification. If you count the Roman Empire as being a form of Italy, as it was originally based around Rome and the Italian peninsula, then Italy at its greatest extent would be this. If you only count the modern Italian nation, Italy at its height would be this. But a new Roman Empire, or even Italy winning World War II, is not something I believe the modern Italian state would have been able to accomplish. A more realistic Greater Italy today, in my opinion, would be something along these lines. For this to happen, a few things would have to change. France would have to for some reason allow Sardinia Piedmont to keep Savoy, Nice, and also Corsica. If the later Italy was additionally given what the Allies promised it following the First World War, it could also have gained not just minor territories in the east, but the entire Dalmatian coast. Italy would then have to manage to not become fascists and stay neutral or even side with the Allies in World War II for it to keep these lands. This Greater Italy would not be significantly more powerful, but it would have a slightly higher population, and many Italians that today live in Switzerland, and other surrounding nations, or ended up moving away from their homelands to other parts of Italy, would have been able to live in their respective regions within the Italian nation. Canada is also a nation that certainly could have ended up larger. Canada, at its greatest extent, is essentially what we already see today, but Canada certainly could have had more territory today had history gone differently. This is just about what I see Canada could have ended up looking like. These additional territories were parts of larger disputed areas which were divided between the US and Canada. But if Canada and the British somehow managed to get more favorable deals, Canada could have controlled more of these regions that are today parts of Maine, Washington State, North Dakota, and Minnesota. Another territory Canada could perhaps have acquired is, as you can see, Alaska. Canada could potentially have acquired it if the US didn't buy it from Russia and the Russians chose to instead sell it to the British to avoid future conflict. This would all make Canada a fair bit larger and certainly more powerful. The minor territories in the east wouldn't do much for Canada, but the lands in modern-day Washington State and Alaska would be a nice boost to the Canadian economy and population. It wouldn't really change history much, but it certainly would change Canada, which would now have a much more significant Pacific presence, not just being limited to Vancouver and its surrounding suburbs, but instead likely having several major cities on the west coast. Turkey was once the Ottoman Empire, a vast empire which essentially took the geopolitical role the Eastern Romans had held for centuries, becoming the economic link between Europe and the Far East. The Ottomans even went as far as modern Ukraine, deep into the Pannonian Basin, and controlled most of the Middle East. But keeping such a massive empire does seem quite unlikely to me, especially as the Ottomans were on their way out due to new trade routes around Africa, as well as trade with the Americas increasingly overshadowing the traditional East-West connection. A realistic Greater Turkey, in my opinion, would instead look something like this. It would be in a scenario where the Ottomans remained neutral in World War I, but still managed to reform their nation and also solidify their control over Arabia. This would allow them to remain the Middle Eastern power, controlling Thrace, Istanbul, Anatolia, Iraq, the Levant, and all of Arabia, except for the British colonies there. This Greater Turkey would be a major regional power and probably quite wealthy from the oil that can be found there. The Middle East would also likely be more stable in this timeline. Now, as with all other episodes in this series, I want to take a look at a smaller nation, and this time it will be Monaco. Monaco, at its greatest extent, controlled modern Monaco, as well as the free cities of Mentone and Roquebrune. And very simply, I think a realistic Greater Monaco would just be one which managed to keep these lands somehow. This Monaco would be quite a different nation than its modern counterpart, and more of a nation than just a city-state. It would of course be home to Monaco itself, but also several other minor towns, and a lot more arable land. But that's just about all for now. I hope this quick look at a few irredentist scenarios was interesting. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button if you want to see more content like this in the future. Also stay tuned for a remake of my Calamar Union scenario, as well as the next episode in my What If Rome Never Fell series. See you around.